The cafeteria was loud the way elementary school cafeterias always are, a rolling noise that bounced off the linoleum and the painted cinder block walls and meant nothing in particular, except that 100 children were alive and fed, and not thinking about anything harder than what to do at recess. Denise Okafor moved through that noise the way she moved through most things, with her head down and her tray in both hands, and her eyes on the floor just ahead of her feet. She was 9 years old and she ate alone, and she had been eating alone since the first week of school. She sat at the far end of the long table near the window, where the light came in grey in November, and she ate whatever was on her tray without looking at it. And when she was finished, she folded her napkin into a small square and waited for the bell. She did not know that anyone had noticed. She had no idea that the man standing near the doorway of his classroom, watching the cafeteria from across the hall, had been watching her for 3 weeks and had already made up his mind. Marcus Webb first noticed her on a Thursday in late October, and he did not say anything about it to anyone. He just went home that evening and sat at his kitchen table for a while, thinking. He was 38 years old, and he had been teaching 5th grade at Carver Elementary for 11 years, and he knew what a child who was not eating enough looked like. He also knew what a child who had decided she was invisible looked like. Denise Okafor was both of those things, and she had been both for longer than 3 weeks. He could see it in the way she sat, in the deliberate smallness she made of herself, in the way she chewed slowly to make the food last. She had the look of a child who had learned that wanting things was dangerous. The next morning he arrived 40 minutes before the first bell. He stopped at the front office and spoke quietly to the school secretary, a woman named Pat, who had worked at Carver for 22 years and knew which kids came to school without breakfast and which ones were wearing the same clothes for the 3rd day in a row. Pat looked at him over her reading glasses and said she had figured he would be in sooner or later about that child. She told him what she knew. Single mother, 2 younger siblings. The family had moved into the district in September. The mother worked mornings, and the bus came early, and sometimes there was not time. Pat said sometimes there was not money either, though she said it in a way that meant she knew it was more than sometimes. Marcus thanked her and went to his classroom and did not tell anyone else what he was thinking. He did not want Denise to become a project. He did not want her to feel the particular sting of being helped loudly, of being the child people pointed at when they talked about giving back. If any of this was going to mean anything, it had to feel like nothing. It had to feel like a thing that simply happened, the way lunch simply happened, the way the bell simply rang. So that Friday at noon he bought 2 trays. He carried them both to the far end of the table near the window and sat down across from her and said, "You mind if I eat over here today? It's loud by the door." Denise looked at him with the careful look of a child who had been surprised before and did not answer right away. Then she said, "Okay." He ate his lunch and read from a small paperback he had brought with him, and did not ask her anything. The second tray he left at the edge of the table, close enough. She ate what was on her own tray, slowly, and then, when she thought he was not looking, she ate half of what was on the second one. He kept reading. He did not look up. When the bell rang, he picked up his tray and she picked up hers, and they walked back toward the classrooms without ceremony. That was all. He did it again the following Monday, the paperback again, 2 trays, nothing much said. By the end of the second week, she had stopped checking whether he was watching. She ate both trays steadily, starting with the fruit, and Marcus Webb sat across from her and read, and sometimes they talked about small things. She asked him once if the book was good. He said parts of it were and handed it over so she could read the back. She read it with the serious concentration she brought to most things and handed it back and said it sounded hard. He said most things worth reading were a little hard at first. She considered this and said, "Okay." He ordered a second copy that same evening and put it on her desk the next morning before she arrived. He did not write her name in it. He just left it there. This is the thing about Marcus Webb that the people who knew him well understood and the people who did not sometimes mistook for something else. He was not loud about goodness. He was not the kind of man who needed you to see him being kind. He had grown up in a house where his own father had worked 2 jobs and never once mentioned it, where the sacrifice was entirely in the doing and not at all in the announcing, and he had carried that into a classroom where 40 different children moved through his life each year, some of them carrying things he would never fully know about. His job, as he understood it, was to see them, not to save them, not to fix them with the noise of his attention, just to see them in the way that being seen makes a person feel they have the right to take up space. He bought Denise lunch every day from that Friday in October through the last day of school in June. 112 days. He kept count in a small notebook he carried in his jacket pocket, not for any particular reason except that he liked to know. On the days when the cafeteria served something she had mentioned not liking, he would find out what the alternative was and make sure the second tray had the alternative. He learned that she did not like the texture of cooked carrots, but she ate raw ones. He learned that she preferred chocolate milk, but sometimes chose plain because she thought it was more grown up. He learned that she always saved the roll for last. These were small things. They were also the whole world of her, the parts of herself she had stopped hiding because she had decided, without ceremony, that he was safe. What Marcus did not know was that Denise's mother had noticed the change in her daughter around December. Cynthia Okafor was 31 years old that year, and she was holding 3 lives together, with wages that did not quite cover the cost, and a faith that had been tested hard enough that she had learned to keep it close and quiet. She noticed things. She noticed when Denise stopped coming home with the hollow look behind her eyes, when the brittleness that had lived in the child's shoulders all fall began to ease. She asked about it one evening while they were washing dishes, the 2 younger ones asleep, and Denise said her teacher ate lunch with her sometimes. Cynthia stood still with her hands in the soapy water and asked, "Like that, every day?" Denise shrugged in the way children shrug to keep the important things from becoming too important, and said, "Mostly." Cynthia turned back to the dishes and did not say anything else, but she thought about it for a long time after, the way you think about something that has happened to you even though it happened to someone else. She did not go to the school. She was working mornings, and she was tired in the particular way of a woman who is doing 3 people's jobs with 1 person's body, and she did not have hours to spare making herself known to teachers, even teachers who were kind. But she knew the name. Marcus Webb. It was on every paper Denise brought home, on the report cards and the permission slips, and the handwritten notes that sometimes appeared at the bottom of Denise's graded work. Notes that said things like "strong analysis here" and "your instinct about the character is exactly right." Notes that cost nothing and meant everything, as those things always do. If you have ever been a child who felt invisible in a school, you know that a teacher can be the hinge on which a life turns. Not always. Not by virtue of being a teacher alone, but when the right person sees you at the right moment, something in you that had been closing starts to open again. And that opening is not a small thing. It is, in fact, everything. I think you already know that. Tell me in the comments if you had someone like Marcus in your life, someone who sat down quietly when you needed them to, because I have a feeling this story is going to reach the people who need it most. Denise Okafor finished 5th grade and moved on to middle school, and Marcus Webb got a new class of 40 children. He did not stop eating near children who sat alone. He had been doing it in one form or another for 11 years, a quiet and unsystematic practice that had never had a name. He would not have called it a practice if you asked him. He would have said he just liked the quiet end of the cafeteria. In 7th grade, when the days were hard in the way that 7th grade is hard for a girl who is smart and serious and does not quite know yet how to wear herself comfortably, Denise thought about the way he had sat down across from her and opened his book and not needed anything from her. She thought about it when she needed to feel like she had the right to be somewhere. It was not a dramatic thought. It was more like a weight she could put her hand on, a ballast, something that kept her level. She had not known at 9 that this was what he was giving her, She had learned it slowly, the way you learn the most important things, over years and without realizing it was a lesson. She went to high school on the other side of the city, a magnet school for students who showed promise in science and mathematics, and she spent 4 years becoming the kind of student who surprised people. Not because she was flashy, because she was steady. Because she had learned from a man who ate lunch at the quiet end of the cafeteria that steady was worth more than loud, that doing the work faithfully and without announcement was its own kind of power. She graduated near the top of her class and received a partial scholarship to study biochemistry at a state university 40 miles from home. She packed 2 bags and went. Marcus Webb heard none of this. He was still at Carver Elementary, still teaching 5th grade, still carrying the small notebook in his jacket pocket. He had been teaching for 22 years by the time Denise finished her undergraduate degree. He had taught roughly 880 children by then, which is not a number most people in any profession can claim, the number of individual lives that pass through the particular gravity of one person's sustained attention. He remembered many of them. He remembered Denise. He remembered the way she had read the back of the paperback with such careful attention and handed it back with a verdict. He had moved into a smaller apartment when his mother passed. He had a garden out back, a narrow strip of dirt between the fence and the building where he grew tomatoes and peppers and a few herbs. He coached a community chess club on Tuesday evenings. He was not lonely. He was, in the quiet way of people who have spent their lives in sustained service to others, deeply content, the contentment sitting in him like ballast, keeping him level on the days when the class was restless, and the resources were thin and the work was hard in ways that did not show up anywhere in the job description. What he did not know on any of those days was that Denise thought about him when she sat down to write. She thought about him when she drafted grant applications for her research, when she sat across from struggling students in her own teaching assistant seminars, when she watched a young person make themselves small in a crowded room. She understood from 20 years of accumulating in her body what it meant to be seen, that sitting down and being present was sometimes the whole of what a person needed. Not the speech, not the intervention, just the presence, just the second tray close enough to reach. She finished her doctorate in cellular biology in the spring of the year she turned 29. 6 years of research into immune response mechanisms, work her advisors described as meticulous, and her external reviewers called some of the most promising work they had seen from a researcher at her stage. She had published 4 papers. She had won 2 grants from national foundations. She had a job offer from a research institute in the city where she had grown up, a position that would let her work and teach and come home to her mother and her brother and her sister, who had grown into people she was fiercely proud of. The doctoral graduation was held on a warm Saturday in May in the university's main auditorium. Cynthia Okafor sat in the 3rd row in the deep green dress she had saved for by cutting the grocery budget down to a number she did not say out loud. Her son sat beside her and her daughter beside him, and an aunt who had driven 4 hours sat on the other side because she was not missing this for anything. Cynthia sat with her hands folded and her back very straight, and she was not crying yet, but she was close, had been close since they parked the car, and she looked up at the building and understood, for the first time in her body, rather than just her mind, that her daughter had made it all the way here. The department chair announced that a doctoral candidate would offer remarks on behalf of the graduating cohort. She read the name. Denise Okafor. Denise walked to the podium in her robe and her hood and stood there a moment before she began, looking out at the room, taking it in the way she took most things, steadily and without performance. She thanked the faculty. She thanked her family. She thanked the researchers whose work had shaped her thinking. And then she said she needed to talk about someone who was not in the room, who had never been in a room like this one, who taught 5th grade at an elementary school and had probably never imagined his name spoken at a doctoral graduation. She said his name, Marcus Webb. She said that when she was 9 years old and new to a school and eating alone, a man had sat down across from her at the far end of the cafeteria and opened a book and not made her feel like a project. She said he did it every day. She said he brought 2 trays and left one close enough for her to reach and never said a word about it. 112 days. She did not know until years later that he had kept count. And when she found out, she had not been surprised, because that was exactly the kind of man he was. The kind of man who kept careful account of the things that mattered and never showed anyone the ledger. She said she had eaten lunch sitting across from a man who saw her so gently that she almost did not know she was being seen, and that this, as much as any single thing in her life, was what had given her the idea that she had the right to be somewhere. That she had a right to take up space, that a quiet kid at the end of the table was not a problem to be managed, but a person to be seen, and that being seen by the right person at the right moment was the kind of thing that changed the shape of everything that came after. The room was very quiet. She said she had spent a long time thinking about what she owed and to whom, and she had come to understand that you could not repay this kind of kindness with money or with credit or with applause. The only thing you could do with it was carry it forward. She said she had been carrying it forward for 20 years, and she intended to keep carrying it into every classroom and every seminar and every conversation with a student who was sitting alone at the quiet end of whatever room they happened to be in. She paused once just near the end and pressed her fingers to the edge of the podium, and she said, None of this would be in front of you if a man had not sat down with a book and a tray and decided that a quiet kid deserved to eat. Cynthia Okafor pressed both hands over her mouth. The woman beside her, a stranger, touched her arm briefly. The room came apart. Someone in Marcus Webb's neighborhood knocked on his door the following Tuesday evening. He was home from the chess club, still in his jacket, and he opened the door to find a young woman he did not recognize right away because 20 years changes a face more than almost anything else does. And the last time he had seen this face, it had been 9 years old and reading the back of a paperback with extraordinary care. He looked at her. She looked back. "You bought my lunch," she said. He nodded once, slowly, the way you nod when you are trying to hold something steady. "Every day," she said. 112, he said, because he still knew. She had a printout of the speech in her jacket pocket, taken from the university's website. She had not needed to bring it. She brought it because she wanted him to have something to hold, because she did not know how else to give him the weight of what he had given her. He took it and held it without opening it, and looked at her in the thin evening light of the doorway, and she could see that he was working to keep himself level, which was the most Marcus Webb thing she had ever seen. He stepped back and held the door wider. "Come in," he said. "I'll make coffee." They sat at his kitchen table for 2 hours. She told him about the research and the doctorate and the position she was starting in the fall. He told her about the chess club and the garden and the class he was teaching now. A boy named Tobias who reminded him of her in the way he made himself very still in loud rooms. She said, "Look out for him." Marcus said he already was. She told him about her mother, who was well and who had said, on the drive home from graduation, that she had wanted to write Marcus a letter for 20 years and never found the right words. He said to tell her the words she already had were more than enough. When Denise stood to leave, she set a small envelope on the table beside his coffee cup. Inside was a card with a photograph of the university auditorium on the front, and a date and a single line in her handwriting. "The room was full, and I said your name." He held it a long time after she left. He sat at the kitchen table and held it, and the house was very quiet around him. Then he got up and set the card on the windowsill where the afternoon light came through, propped against the glass, and he left it there. 3 months later, Denise began her position at the Research Institute. Her lab was on the 7th floor of a glass building downtown, and on her first morning she arrived 40 minutes before she needed to and stood at the window for a while looking out at the city that had grown around her. She had placed 2 things on her desk: a photograph of her mother and her brother and her sister at the graduation, their faces open with something she did not quite have a word for, and a copy of the small paperback that Marcus Webb had handed across a cafeteria table so she could read the back. She still had the original, the one he had left on her desk when she was 9 with no name written in it. She had carried it from apartment to apartment through 6 years of graduate school, wrapped in cloth inside a shoebox that also held her grandmother's earrings and the stub from the bus ticket she had taken to her first college orientation. She had never once thought about leaving it behind. Some things are too much themselves to be left anywhere. Marcus Webb taught 5th grade at Carver Elementary for 3 more years after that Tuesday evening, and when he retired at 62, Pat from the front office organised a small party in the gymnasium. There was a card signed by more names than would fit comfortably, and a sheet cake and a photograph someone had thought to take of the far end of the cafeteria table by the window, the place where the grey November light came in, with a small handwritten card propped against the napkin holder. It said, simply, 2 trays. He cried at that. Not loudly. In the steady, unhurried way of a man who had always done the important things without announcing them and was not about to start announcing things now. He still coaches chess on Tuesday evenings. The garden came back strong this year, the tomatoes especially. The small notebook in his jacket pocket has been replaced twice. The pages of the old ones folded and kept in a drawer with the card from Denise, the one with the photograph of the auditorium, and the line she wrote in her own handwriting. Denise calls him every few months. They talk about what they are reading. She tells him about the research and he tells her about the garden, and sometimes they sit in the particular silence of people who have known each other for a long time in the most important way, the way that doesn't require explanation or ceremony, the way that began at a cafeteria table with a second tray left close enough to reach. The worn original paperback sits on her desk in the lab on the 7th floor. She has read it 4 times. She has dog-eared the pages she likes most. One day she will hand it to a student who is sitting alone and say, You can read the back if you want. The student will read it with great care and hand it back and say, "It sounds hard." And she will say yes. Most things worth reading are a little hard at first, and she will mean more than the book, and the student may not understand what she means for years, and that will be exactly right. That is how it goes. That is how it has always gone. The kindness sits down quietly and does not announce itself, and the world keeps its ledger, and a name is spoken in a full room. And somewhere a man unfolds a card in the light of a kitchen window and holds it until he is steady again. Kindness has a long memory. The world keeps its accounts even when we do not. This story found you because you needed it, and I hope you carry some part of it with you into whatever room you walk into next. If someone sat down at your table when you were the quiet kid, leave their name in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, there is another story just like it right here, waiting for you when you are ready. This story is a work of fiction inspired by the quiet, faithful care of real teachers. The characters and events are imagined. The truth they carry is not. There are things you carry in a body that do not have names yet when you are 9 years old. They are not abstract. They are in the shoulders, in the way you hold your neck, in the practiced invisibility of a child who has learned that drawing attention is a risk, and that the safest posture is to take up as little room as possible. Denise Okafor had that posture down by the time she was 8. It was not a decision she had made consciously. It was more like weather, something that had settled into her over the first months after her father left, and the apartment got smaller, and the mornings got louder with the logistics of keeping 3 kids fed and on the bus. She had been a cheerful child before that, her mother said later, the kind of child who ran rather than walked and asked questions in long chains. The quietness came on gradually, the way most important changes do, and by the time she arrived at Carver Elementary in September of that year, she wore it like a second skin. She had transferred twice before. She knew how to be new. The trick was to be so small that no one noticed you had arrived, and then no one would notice when you left either, and the leaving would not cost you anything you had not already learned to live without. She was good at her schoolwork. She had always been good at her schoolwork, which was the one thing she allowed herself without apology, the one place she did not shrink. In the classroom she was quiet, but she was not absent, and Marcus Webb had noticed that first, before he noticed the lunch. He had noticed the way she worked through problems, the thoroughness of it, the way she went back and checked her reasoning in a way that most 10-year-olds did not bother with. He had put a note on her first graded paper. "Your instinct here is right. Trust it." She had not responded to the note out loud, but the next week she had turned in work that was, if anything, more careful and more thorough, and he had understood that the note had landed. He thought about that sometimes, in the years after, how much weight a single sentence could carry when it was the right sentence at the right time. He had written notes like that on student papers for 22 years, and he did not always know which ones mattered. He suspected that was the nature of the work, that you planted things without knowing which ones would take root, that the job was to keep planting. The math, he figured, was probably working in your favour most of the time, even when you could not see it. Probably. You had to believe, probably, or the days that felt thin would overwhelm the days that felt full. He thought about this in December of that year, when the days were short and the heat in the building ran uneven, and he was tired in the way that teachers get tired around December, a deep physical weariness layered over a stubborn refusal to stop caring. He sat at his desk after the children had gone, and ate the apple he brought every day, and looked at the stack of ungraded papers and thought about the children in them. The ones he could see clearly, and the ones he was still trying to understand. Tobias, who was 2 years ahead of his grade level in reading and had not told anyone. Marisol, who had started bringing her younger brother to the bus stop because her parents were working nights. Jerome, who laughed at everything a second too late, as if he was translating jokes from another language in real time. And Denise, who saved the roll for last and had started, just in the past few weeks, to look up from her tray occasionally while she ate. That was progress. He had learned over 22 years to read progress in small units. A child who had not spoken to you in 3 weeks says a single word. A child who has been wearing the same shoes since September comes in with new ones on a Monday. A child who ate with her head down starts occasionally to look up. These were the units the work ran on, and they were not small at all if you understood what they cost. Cynthia Okafor understood what they cost. She was not a woman who had the luxury of not understanding costs. She had worked the morning shift at a hotel downtown since September, up before 5, home by 3, 2 children dropped at a neighbour's and one old enough for the bus on her own. She was tired in a way she did not describe to her children because she did not want her tiredness to be a burden they felt responsible for carrying. She was their mother. Her tiredness was part of the contract, the hidden line item that did not appear anywhere in the deal you made when you became someone's parent, but was always in there regardless. She paid it every day, and she did not talk about it. What she did talk about, quietly and on purpose, was the future. She talked about it at dinner in the 10 or 15 minutes between the food and the homework and the baths, with a specificity she had worked hard to cultivate. Not someday you will do great things, which was what people said when they meant well but did not believe what they were saying. She talked about the particular mechanics of possibility. She said, Denise, you are going to need to know how to think clearly in a room full of people who went to better schools. And the way you practice that is the way you practice everything, which is by doing it before you have to. She said, when you know a thing well enough to explain it to someone else, then you know it. Until then, you are still learning it. These were the sentences Denise grew up inside of, the architecture of a mind being built, and she did not understand at the time how unusual they were. She just thought that was what mothers said. The two together, Marcus Webb's notes and Cynthia Okafor's sentences, were a kind of education that did not appear on any transcript. They were the real curriculum. The biochemistry and the publication record and the grants came from the official curriculum, from the laboratories and the advisors and the years of methodical research. But the shape of the person doing all of it, the steadiness and the patience and the refusal to be diminished, and the willingness to sit with something hard until it opened up, that shape came from somewhere else. It came from a kitchen table at night and a cafeteria table in November, and a man who liked the quiet end of the room. There was a moment in Denise's 3rd year of her doctoral program when the research stalled. It happens. It happens to everyone doing real work, the months when the data does not cooperate and the grant cycle turns against you and the thing you were so sure about 6 months ago starts to look uncertain. And the uncertainty is not exciting anymore, but just exhausting. She had 3 weeks in the fall of that year when she woke up every morning and sat on the edge of her bed and had to argue herself into standing up. She called her mother during those weeks, she talked to her advisor, she went for long walks in the evenings and sat in the campus library among people who were working and let their working be company. And she thought about Marcus Webb, not in a sentimental way, in a practical way. She thought about the fact that he had sat at that table for 112 days without any guarantee that it was doing anything, without any way to measure it, without anyone to tell him he was right to keep showing up. He had just kept showing up. The showing up was the whole of it. She thought about that in the mornings when she was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she got up. She told him this, the Tuesday evening in his kitchen when they drank coffee, and she talked about the doctorate and the research and the hard 3rd year. He had listened, and then he had said, quietly, you know the work is worth doing when it's hard to stop, even when it's hard to continue. She had written that down when she got home. It is in a notebook she still keeps. He had said one other thing that evening that she has thought about since. She had asked him whether he remembered specifically the 112, whether he had known back then that it was adding up to something. He had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said he had not thought about it as adding up. He had thought about it as today. Every day had been today. The today of a child who needed to eat and who also needed to know that a person in a position of some small authority thought she was worth the bother of a second tray. He said, if you are waiting to know it's adding up, you'll never start. You just have to believe in today and trust that the days have a way of stacking without your help. She had not known, sitting across from him in that kitchen, what to do with the fullness of what she was feeling. She was 29 years old, and she had a doctorate, and she was sitting across from the person who had made the most important decision about her life before she was old enough to know she needed anyone to make it. She did the only thing that seemed right. She picked up her coffee cup and drank from it and looked out the window at the dark garden and said, the tomatoes look good. And he had said, the tomatoes are having a good year, and that was enough. It was more than enough. It was the whole thing.